Hi friends. Welcome to Rising Recap. An unexpected turn of events where a bookish child exchanges abilities with a professional basketball player. Let's relive the classic story of Thunderstruck, the 2012 film that exposed the nerdy kid who exchanges abilities with a professional basketball player. Join us for a comedic and heartwarming journey. The movie begins with Brian, a young basketball enthusiast, fixated on the game playing on the screen in front of him. His idol, the legendary Kevin Durant of the Thunder team, effortlessly glides across the court, scoring point after point with his signature playing technique. Watching in awe, Brian tells himself that he too could one day master the art of the dunk. Eager to put his newfound inspiration to the test, Brian rushes to his backyard court, determined to replicate Kevin's moves. But as he goes for his first dunk, the ball slips out of his hands, causing him to stumble and fall. Brian's brother, who had been secretly recording him the whole time, can't help but laugh. Meanwhile, Kevin and his manager, Alan, return home, tired but victorious after another outstanding performance. As they get ready for bed, Kevin looks forward to meeting his fans the next day, who will undoubtedly be waiting to ask for autographs and photos. As Brian sat chatting with his close friend Mitch, a new student caught his eye, Isabel, a girl with a captivating gaze and a charming smile. Over lunch in the school cafeteria, Brian couldn't help but tell Mitch about his newfound interest in getting to know Isabel. But to his surprise, Mitch was hesitant, warning Brian of the potential consequences of approaching her, as he is known as a nerd at the school. But Brian refused to be deterred. He argued that Isabel is a newcomer and wouldn't know anything about his reputation and that he was determined to make a good impression on her. As Brian confidently approached Isabel, eager to make a good impression, his heart sank as he saw Connor, a school bully, pull out his phone and play a humiliating video. It was footage of Brian attempting to replicate one of Kevin Durant's signature dunks, but instead of soaring through the air, he could be seen jumping on a trampoline and missing the ball entirely, crashing into the hoop and hitting his feet. The entire school erupted in laughter and jeers, as Brian's embarrassment and shame washed over him. At that moment, he knew that his chance to introduce himself to Isabel was lost, and he was too humiliated to even greet her. Lying on his bed, feeling defeated and embarrassed by the events of the day, Brian couldn't help but wonder what his fate held for him. But just as he was about to give up hope, his father walked in, sensing his distress. Knowing that Brian was going through a tough time, he came up with a plan to lift his spirits. He suggested they go see Kevin Durant, Brian's idol, play live in a game. As they sat in the stands, surrounded by the energy of the crowd, Brian couldn't believe his luck. The game was intense and Brian was on the edge of his seat, cheering for his favorite player. Suddenly, the MC announced that the game was paused and asked the audience to take out their ticket stubs. Inside each one, there was a number, and if that number was called, the ticket holder would have the chance to go down to the court and take a shot. Brian's heart skipped a beat as he saw his number staring back at him from the stub. He couldn't believe it. This was his chance to live his dream, to be like Kevin Durant. As the MC called out the number, Brian's heart raced with anticipation. And when it was announced that the number belonged to his father's ticket, he couldn't believe his luck. His father, with a sly grin, stands up and quickly raises Brian's hand, claiming the number as his own. Brian could hardly contain his excitement as he made his way down to the court. The MC announced that if Brian made the shot, he would be awarded $20,000. But little did Brian know that Connor, the school bully who had humiliated him earlier, was also in attendance and had his camera ready to capture Brian's every move. As Brian took the shot, the crowd held their breath, but unfortunately, the ball didn't go in. Instead, it hit the mascot, causing it to fall. With a weary face, Brian walked off the court, feeling defeated. But what he didn't expect was that Kevin Durant himself was there to meet him. He was impressed by Brian's determination and asked him to take a picture with him. As Kevin signed the basketball, Brian could hardly believe his luck. He took the ball from Kevin, feeling its weight in his hands, and gazed up at his hero. With a smile, Kevin told him that he would make it next time, and Brian couldn't help but express his admiration for Kevin's talent. But to Brian's surprise, Kevin replied that he hoped to give him his talent, and as he handed the ball over, he imparted a powerful message, that hard work would always beat talent. At that moment, Brian felt a surge of energy flowing from Kevin to him, and he knew that he would never give up on his dreams, no matter what obstacles he faced. With newfound determination and inspiration, Brian left the arena, knowing that with hard work, he could accomplish anything. As Brian awoke from his slumber, the radio announced the crushing defeat of his beloved Thunder team during the previous night's match. With a heavy heart, he dragged himself out of bed and trudged to the bathroom. But as he entered, something strange occurred. Without any warning, Brian began to strip off his clothes, tossing each piece carelessly into the dirty clothes basket outside the bathroom door. As if in a trance, he continued to empty the contents of his pockets and even his shoes into the basket. It was as if he was in a dream and everything felt surreal. As Brian engaged in his school's practicum, his teacher posed a task to him. She asked him to take hold of the liver. With a steady hand, Brian reached for the organ, and without conscious thought, he began to execute a smooth spin move, as if he were on the basketball court. His best friend, Mitch, looked on in amazement, unable to believe what he was seeing. Even Brian was surprised as he found himself effortlessly handling the liver with the grace of a seasoned pro. It was as if the moves he had been practicing on the court had somehow transferred to this unexpected situation. As Brian and his best friend Mitch arrived at the bustling night market, Brian's eyes caught sight of Isabel, standing next to a basketball game stand. Connor, the school bully who had humiliated him earlier, was also there, trying to shoot basketballs for a prize, but failing miserably. Brian and Mitch couldn't help but laugh at Connor's misfortune to the role of the court jester. Enraged, Connor dared Brian to try his hand at the game. Brian and Mitch were ready to walk away, but something inside Brian stirred. He immediately turned around, picked up the basketball, and with a fluid motion, he launched the ball into the basket. To Connor's surprise, the ball went in. With disbelief, Connor handed the ball back to Brian, thinking it was just a fluke. But Brian repeated his feat, again and again, each time the ball swooshed through the hoop. With each successful shot, Connor's anger and frustration grew, until he stormed off in a huff. Brian, feeling victorious, picked up a giant panda doll as a prize and offered it to Isabel. They shared a smile and introduced themselves, leaving the night market together, holding the panda doll between them, a symbol of the beginning of a new friendship. As Kevin Durant stepped onto the court, his mind was focused on one thing: perfecting his skills. But as he began to practice, it became alarmingly clear that something was off. Despite his best efforts, the ball refused to find its way into the basket, and Kevin couldn't help but feel a sense of frustration and defeat creeping in. Meanwhile, Brian was training at home, and his abilities had undergone a remarkable transformation. The ball seemed to obey his every command, effortlessly finding its way into the basket with each throw. As he honed his skills, Brian couldn't help but wonder what had caused such a drastic change in his performance. As the Eagles were in the middle of their practice, Brian made an unexpected appearance. With his newfound confidence and skills, Brian caught the attention of the team and Kevin in particular. He couldn't help but notice the stark contrast between Brian's fluid movements and his own struggles. At that moment, Kevin realized that he had lost his touch and that Brian had surpassed him in terms of skill and technique. As Brian stepped onto the court, dressed in the team's uniform, the coach couldn't help but notice him and asked why he was wearing the uniform. Without hesitation, Brian replied that he wanted to try out for the team again, but he was immediately met with rejection from the coach. Undeterred, Brian tried to convince the coach that his abilities had changed dramatically, but the coach remained skeptical. Without permission, Brian took matters into his own hands and grabbed the ball from Connor's hands, challenging him to a game of one-on-one. He was determined to showcase his newfound skills and prove himself worthy of a spot on the team. As Brian took the court, everyone present was shocked by his incredible abilities, executing moves and making shots that they had never seen before. Only Connor looked visibly annoyed. The coach and his assistant immediately stepped in to play defense, but Brian effortlessly outmaneuvered them, leaving them in awe. The coach, impressed by Brian's skills and determination, finally gave him a chance to try out for the team. The moment had finally arrived, Brian's first match as a main player of the Eagles team. As the game began, Brian eagerly took the court, ready to prove himself. But his opponent, Connor, seemed determined to keep the ball away from Brian at all costs, even when he was in a prime position to score. The coach, growing increasingly emotional, issued a stern warning to Connor, telling him that if he didn't pass the ball to Brian, he would be replaced from then on. With the coach's words ringing in his ears, Connor reluctantly passed the ball to Brian, who immediately took advantage of the opportunity. Brian began to show off his skills, executing moves that left the crowd gasping in awe. With each shot, he proved himself to be a true star, and it was clear that he had earned his place on the team. Brian's performance on the court was electric. He was a force to be reckoned with, and the crowd couldn't get enough of him. The next day, as Brian walked the halls of his school, he couldn't help but notice the change in how people treated him. Overnight, he had become a celebrity, with everyone clamoring to be near him and bask in his newfound fame. In every basketball game, Brian was a driving force, scoring the most points and leading his team to victory. He had become the heart and soul of the Eagles team, and his star was rising. Meanwhile, Kevin Durant's performance was rapidly declining. The media was full of reports of his poor game, and the manager was pulling out all the stops to get him back on track, including bringing his mother to make her famous chicken soup. As Brian's fame grew, he and Isabel grew closer, and they often found themselves spending time together, even playing cards while Kevin was busy shooting a shoe ad. But even during these shoots, Kevin couldn't seem to catch a break, as he repeatedly stumbled and failed to make the shots, much to the dismay of the ad team. The director's patience had reached its limit, as Kevin continued to flub his lines and missed the shots, even going as far as hitting the director with a stray basketball. In a fit of frustration, the director halted filming and stormed off, declaring that Kevin was a total disappointment. Back in his room, Alan, Kevin's manager, couldn't help but feel a sense of dread as he flipped through a magazine filled with negative reviews of Kevin's performance. As he flipped through the channels on his TV, he was bombarded with more of the same, as commentators and presenters criticized Kevin's game. But as he changed the channel, he stumbled upon a news article that caught his attention. The article claimed that there was a local player who could be the next big star for the Thunder, a revelation that piqued Alan's interest. As he watched the news, the anchor mentioned that the boy was the one who had made a shot during a Thunder game a few weeks ago. Other news said the boy must have stolen Kevin Durant's talent. Alan was intrigued and began to research, watching videos of both Kevin's and Brian's playing styles. To his surprise, he found that Brian's game was almost identical to Kevin's. One day, Alan decided to attend one of Brian's basketball games live, curious to see the local player's skills for himself. As he watched Brian on the court, he was amazed by the level of talent and skill he possessed. After the game, Alan went straight to Kevin and revealed his discovery, explaining that someone had taken Kevin's abilities and that someone was Brian, the kid who had made the shot during the Thunder game. Alan told Kevin that before Brian met Kevin, his game was mediocre at best. Kevin, however, couldn't believe what Alan was saying. It seemed impossible to him. He thanked Alan for his concern but warned him that if he continued to entertain such thoughts, he would be fired. Despite this, Alan couldn't shake off the feeling that there was something strange about Brian's sudden rise to success. Brian and Isabel were enjoying each other's company, deep in conversation when they were interrupted by the arrival of Alan. They couldn't help but feel a little annoyed by the intrusion, but that feeling was quickly replaced by excitement once Alan introduced himself as Kevin Durant's manager. The next day, Alan and Kevin made an unexpected visit to Brian's school. Kevin was confused, as Alan had previously said that they would be conducting a community outreach program for underprivileged schools, but it was clear that this was just a ruse to get Kevin to see the truth with his own eyes and believe in Alan's theory that Brian had taken Kevin's talent. Kevin and Alan entered Brian's classroom and Alan explained that they were there to conduct a community outreach program. As they walked in, they saw that it was math class, and there was a question written on the blackboard. Without hesitation, Alan called Brian to the front of the class and asked him to solve the question. Kevin was shocked to see that it was the same boy who had made the shot during the Thunder game, but Alan pretended not to know. Kevin greeted Brian warmly. Feeling optimistic, Alan grabbed Kevin and Brian's hands and swung them around, hoping that this would bring Kevin's talent back. He even tried to grab Kevin's hand and swing to high-five each other. But despite these attempts, Kevin's talent still hadn't returned. Feeling disappointed, Alan asked Kevin and Brian to step out of the classroom together, hoping that maybe some time spent together would help Kevin regain his talent. As Kevin and Brian sat in the cafeteria, all the students gathered around to watch them. Alan, still determined to bring Kevin's abilities back, tried to physically connect the two by pulling Kevin's hand to hold Brian's body. Even as they left the school, Alan announced that they would be giving away free boots to the Eagles team. After the shoes were distributed, Alan pulled Brian aside to take a picture with Kevin, still trying to find a way to rekindle Kevin's talent. On the way home, Alan asked Kevin how he felt around Brian, and if anything had changed in him. But Kevin was visibly annoyed and angry with Alan's persistence. He told Alan that he was aware that everyone was laughing at his game, but Alan's current efforts were futile. He also observed that Brian's game had changed. He was playing with confidence and started being selfish by not passing the ball to Connor and his teammates. As Kevin competed in another game, his performance was once again lacking, leaving commentators to declare that the Thunder team was on the brink of defeat. This marked the complete downfall of Kevin Durant. Meanwhile, Brian was out partying with his friends, reveling in his newfound success. Isabel, however, began to feel uncomfortable with his arrogant attitude. She distanced herself from him, and when he chased after her, asking what was wrong, she asked to talk elsewhere. But before they could have a proper conversation, Brian was swept away by his friends, and Isabel left the party feeling disappointed. As Mitch was sorting through a pile of t-shirts, one with Brian's face printed on it, he called Brian to remind him of an upcoming event, but Brian was too preoccupied with his own fun to hang out with Mitch. Brian and his friends were in the middle of a good time when someone announced that his parents were coming, causing all the kids to scatter in panic, but it was only Alan. He sternly told Brian that he needed to return Kevin Durant's talent back. Brian was confused and didn't understand what Alan meant. Alan then questioned Brian about the sudden change in his abilities, asking about his average score before and after he met Kevin. Brian replied that he had never been on the team before and now he had scored 48 points in a game. Alan then revealed that Kevin had never failed to score a point, but now he couldn't score a single point and that the talent that Brian had now was not his. He warned Brian that Oklahoma people who love the Thunder team and Kevin would be disappointed if the team lost. With that, Alan left, leaving Brian to ponder on his words. As the Eagles coach stood on the basketball court, giving a rousing speech to prepare the team for the playoffs, players were called up one by one. Brian, lost in thought, is jolted back to reality when he sees Isabel, who tells him that maybe after the season is over they can both go back. Brian, embarrassed, tells her that it was because of basketball that she started to notice him, but Isabel surprises him by revealing that she had been watching him since the first day he walked down the hall. Brian was taken aback, and Isabel told him to go and join his team as the coach and fans were calling out his name. After the event, Brian approached his coach to inquire about his performance on the team, but the coach brushed off the question, telling Brian to focus on the task at hand. The following day, as Brian was riding his bike, he came across a poster of Kevin Durant's face and was struck with an idea. He quickly called Alan and asked to be picked up. Upon arriving at the practice facility, Kevin was surprised to see Brian and asked him why he came. Brian revealed that he wanted to give Kevin's talent back, but Kevin dismissed the idea, turning to Alan and accusing him of putting that notion in Brian's head. But Alan urged Brian to demonstrate his abilities, proving the truth of the situation. As Alan watched, he asked Brian to show Kevin his usual moves, but to everyone's surprise, Brian began to execute special moves that only Kevin himself could perform. Kevin stood in disbelief as Alan urged the two of them to hold the basketball together and repeat the words they said earlier. Kevin handed the ball to Brian, eager to prove that the transfer of talent had worked. Alan instructed them to shoot, but despite their efforts, nothing seemed to change. They tried various methods to regain Kevin's abilities, but all were unsuccessful. Brian apologized, saying that he never intended for this to happen, and Kevin, understanding, forgave him. As Kevin realized that he might have to start from scratch, he bid farewell and left. Brian, feeling guilty, went to Isabel's house to apologize and explain the strange circumstances of the talent swap. He showed her a video of the incident, and although she was initially skeptical, she soon believed him. As they watched the footage together, Brian had a sudden realization. It was the moment when his shot hit the mascot's head and caused it to faint that his talent had been transferred to Kevin. Without a moment's hesitation, Brian jumped on his bike and raced to where Kevin was currently competing. The Thunder team was trailing far behind the opposing team at that point. The crowd roared as Kevin made an incredible comeback, leading the Thunder team to victory. Isabel, who had followed Brian to the game, watched in awe as Brian's selfless act led to Kevin's redemption. Brian, who had always idolized Kevin, finally found his own path as a humble and true friend. The game ended with Kevin and Brian high-fiving each other, with Rumble the mascot looking on, forgiven and forgotten. The Thunder team had won the game, but more importantly, Brian and Kevin had won each other's respect and friendship. As the game resumed, Kevin took the court with renewed vigor, his talent fully restored. With each shot, he effortlessly sank the ball through the hoop, leaving the crowd in awe. Meanwhile, Brian watched from the sidelines, feeling a mix of joy and sadness. Though he had helped Kevin regain his abilities, he couldn't help but feel a sense of loss. As he trained alone, he struggled to make even the simplest of shots. Even his best friend Mitch seemed distant, their friendship slowly drifting away. As the game progressed, Brian's confidence waned and his game faltered. He couldn't seem to make a shot and his teammates were visibly frustrated with him. But just as the game seemed lost, Brian had a sudden spark of inspiration. He remembered the words of his idol, Kevin Durant, and how hard work can beat talent. With renewed determination, Brian hustled on defense and made crucial passes to set up his teammates for easy baskets. And as the buzzer sounded, Brian hit a game-winning three-pointer, leading his team to victory. The crowd erupted in cheers and Brian's teammates lifted him up on their shoulders, celebrating their unlikely comeback. Brian realized that sometimes, it's not about the talent you have, but the heart and determination you put into it. With the game on the line, Brian felt the weight of the world on his shoulders. His teammates and coach had faith in him, but he couldn't shake off the feeling of inadequacy that had been plaguing him since he lost Kevin Durant's talent. But just as the clock ticked down, a familiar face appeared courtside. Kevin Durant, accompanied by his manager Allen, had come to watch the game. With a confident smirk, Kevin leaned in and whispered a secret code into Brian's ear. Suddenly, Brian felt a surge of energy flows through him. With renewed determination, he led his team to victory with a clutch three-pointer in the final seconds. As the crowd erupted in cheers, Brian looked up to Kevin and saluted his basketball idol, grateful for the boost of confidence he had received. If you enjoy this video, click these videos. This is my recommendation for you. Make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel.